So hello friends and welcome to my channel. So today I'll be discussing about tetanus. So I've made this video in two parts. In the first part I will be discussing about the definition, the etiology, the epidemiology and about the pathogenesis of tetanus. So let's start. So tetanus is an acute disease manifested by skeletal muscle spasms and autonomic nervous system disturbances. And it is caused by a powerful toxin produced by bacterium Clostridium tetani. Okay, so tetanus is completely preventable by vaccination. It is diagnosed on clinical grounds by supportive lab confirmation of presence of Clostridium tetani. Okay, so now I'll be discussing about neonatal tetanus and the maternal tetanus. So neonatal tetanus is defined by the WHO as an illness occurring in a child who has normal ability to suck and cry in first 2 days of life, but he loses this ability between the days 3 and 28 and becomes rigid and has spasms. So this is about the neonatal tetanus. The maternal tetanus is defined by the WHO as the tetanus occurring during pregnancy or within 6 weeks after conclusion of pregnancy. Conclusion of pregnancy here means as either birth, miscarriage or abortion. So moving to the next. So the etiology of tetanus is Clostridium tetani, which is an aerobic gram positive, and this is the spore forming rod. Okay, so these spores are highly resilient and can survive readily in environment throughout the world. Also, these spores resist boiling and many disinfectants. Resist boiling. Okay, so these spores enter through abrasions, wounds or umbilical stumping. Wounds or umbilical stumping. Okay, so once this bacteria are in a suitable environment, these organisms grow, multiply and then they release the tetanus toxin. So this is the exotoxin which they produce. Okay, so this exotoxin enters the nervous system and then causes the disease. Enters the nervous system and causes the disease. Okay, so even very low concentration of the tetanus toxin can result in tetanus. So I will just mention it here. So the minimum lethal dose is 2.5 nanogram per kilogram. Okay, so who are at higher risk? So the elder people of age greater than 60 years old are at higher risk for tetanus. Why? Because the antibodies decreases over time. Because the antibodies decreases over time. So moving to the next, that is the pathogenesis of tetanus, which is although closely related to the botulinum toxin in structure and the mode of action, but tetanus undergoes retrograde transport. And in the CNS, So thus produces clinical effects different from the botulinum toxin. So tetanus toxin is intra-axonally transported. Is intra-axonally transported. Okay, so this tetanus toxin is intra-axonally transported to the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves, or you can call them as the ventral horns, motor nuclei of cranial nerves, which you can call them as the ventral horns. Okay, so they are transported to the motor nuclei. Now this tetanus toxin is actually produced as a single 150 kilodalton protein, which is then cleaved into light chain and heavy chain and the light chain. So the heavy chain is of 100 kilodalton, whereas this light chain is of 50 kilodalton. So these chains are linked by the disulfide bonds. Okay, so now the carboxy terminal of the heavy chain, binds to the specific membrane components in the presynaptic alpha motor nerve terminals. I will just write it here. The carboxy terminal binds to specific membrane components in presynaptic alpha motor nerve terminals. So here presynaptic is the most important in tetanus toxin. Now moving to the next, this binding results in the toxin internalization. This binding results in the toxin internalization. And once they are inside the neuron, the toxin then enters a retrograde pathway. Then it enters the retrograde pathway. The next step, which is actually less understood, but it involves the tetanus toxin escaping through the normal lysosomal degradation processes and undergoing translocation across the synapse. So here the light chain, which is zinc dependent endopeptidase, it cleaves the VAMP2, that is the protein, it is the vesicle associated membrane protein. I will mention it here. It is the vesicle associated membrane protein 2, which is also known as the synaptobrevin. And this synaptobrevin is necessary for presynaptic binding. This is necessary for presynaptic binding and release of the neurotransmitters. I'll just write it NT here. So thus the tetanus toxin now prevents the transmitter release. Tetanus toxin prevents the transmitter release. and then it effectively blocks the inhibitory interneuron discharge. Then it effectively blocks inhibitory neuron discharge. And this is then resulted into the unregulated activity in the motor nervous system. So this all causes the unregulated activity in the motor nervous system. So this was all about the definition, etiology, epidemiology, and about the pathogenesis of the tetanus toxin. So in the next video, the next part of tetanus, I will discuss about the clinical manifestation, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the treatment, and about the prevention of the tetanus toxin. So that was all. Thank you.